jumping on another Starboard webinar. Cool, I think we might kick into it. Anyone who is joining in a few minutes will be able to go back and get the recording of this, which we'll share. So yeah, thanks for jumping on the webinar today. My name's Andy Hovey. I'm the Chief Product Officer here at Starboard, and with me is Kelly, the Chief Marketing Officer. I'm going to talk largely about something that we've just released, which is a huge release, but a lot of it is kind of behind the scenes and sets us up for some future capabilities. And then I'm going to hand over to Kelly, who's going to talk a bunch about the Regional Fishery Management Organization, or RFMO, authorisations and integration of those databases that we've done with Starboard.
I was just say, just mentioning the questions and answers, so we can, if you've got any questions and answers, feel free to put them in the Q&A. You can do that anonymously or with your name attached, up to you. I can answer them while Andy's talking, and he can answer while I'm talking. And we've also, I think, successfully enabled the chat. So if you've got anything you want to put in there as well, hopefully that's available to you as well. Sorry.
Awesome, thanks, Kelly. Yeah, and with the questions and answers, I mean, today's webinar, it's pretty cool, actually. The vast majority of you are existing Starboard users. And so in those questions, what would be really cool when I'm talking about filtering is fire through what you would love to see as the next available filters, or any kind of thoughts on that. And in the same vein, I know some of you have had access to a Starboard beta and been using that for the last week or so. So thanks very much to those people who provided feedback and used it and played with it and tested it before we released it to everyone. So a quick recap, and I think everyone's pretty familiar with this. What Starboard's doing is we're taking a whole bunch of data sources on the left-hand side there, and then kind of blending those and processing them with a bunch of algorithms and models, and then using that to help analysts identify vessels of interest, which, depending on the analyst and the job, is a very different picture of what is interesting. But going along with bringing all these data sources in and processing vessel movements and blending the data and turning it into billions of events about the maritime world, we need a way to process filter the data. We need a way that customers can work with it to answer questions that they have. And that's the kind of big release that we've made today. So I'm going to jump over to Starboard to talk a little bit about some of the differences. And so kind of fundamentally what we've done is that Starboard used to load all of the information that you had asked for. It would load all of that onto your computer. And then let's say you only wanted to look at cargo vessels, it would remove the cargo vessels from your screen, but essentially they had loaded them on your screen. And so now fundamentally what we're doing is we're doing all of that kind of filtering and analysis in the cloud. And that means that it's a bunch faster to look at particular vessels, to look at tags, look over bigger areas, and look over longer timeframes. And so this really sets us up for things like ingesting VMS data in future, things like more complex heat mapping and other kind of long time frame analysis and multi-source analysis. So what you're looking at on screen is pretty familiar to many of you. I'm looking at today, 18th of July UTC. I'm looking at the area on screen. This is kind of the same as now. I see the results on the left-hand side with any tags. So these are a bunch of tags that we have in a demo organization. And kind of the first big change you'll note is that under area, rather than looking at on screen, I can go anywhere. And so the really cool thing about this is I can get an answer to the world's vessels outside what I can see on screen. And if I move around, the analysis results don't change. So I can see that in the first hour of the 18th of July UTC, there were 175,000 vessels that were reporting on AIS. If I just move the zoom controllers a little bit, let's say I'm interested in only cargo vessels. I can now select all of the cargo vessels, and it'll go and filter the world and only give me cargo vessels. And I can see that there's about 57,000 cargo vessels. And with this kind of capability, you can start doing really interesting kind of analysis with tags and kind of areas. So some example kind of, let's say I'm looking at the New Zealand EEZ, and I only want to look at entered from a foreign port. Let's say I'm going to look over the past month, and now I can see the answer to my question. There's 173 vessels that have entered the New Zealand EEZ from a port that's outside that area that are cargo vessels. And no matter what I'm doing on screen, the answer to that question, the analysis result stays the same. And so one of the changes is that when you're moving around now, rather than vessels automatically loading, the query that you have set will stay the same. And then you get this option to show vessels on screen here. One of the other things that we've done is you can zoom out a whole lot further than you used to be able to. So in this case here, I can see that there's some pretty clear patterns of traffic coming to New Zealand. And perhaps if I was interested in some analysis of looking at vessels that have come from the Panama Canal, I can select all of these and have these highlighted and like everything else in Starboard, move these through time. But one of the things that is really powerful is, let's say, for example, I'm only interested in Panamanian cargo vessels that have entered New Zealand. Now I can see that there are 37 of these that have entered over June. In an operational setting, in a fisheries context, potentially you're looking at which vessels have been in an area this year compared to which vessels have been in an area to last year. Or if you're looking at small craft movement, you might be looking, which small craft vessels have come to New Zealand or to another destination, and how does that differ from previous years. So now in the vessel list, I can see all of these details as before, but I also have the option to select them all and add and remove tags. So if I select all these vessels, I can add a descriptive tag. Let's say it's cargo vessels entered NZ June 2023, Panama. And now I've got this tag that's attached to all of these vessels. And if I add this tag, I'm not sure whether I saved that tag. Oh, yes, I did. Sorry. If I go and add this tag here, I can see cargo vessels enter New Zealand. Now, if I remove all of the other filtering, unsurprisingly, it's the same number of tags that's entered over this period. But if I want to jump to May, now I've got a really good way of going, what are all the cargo vessels that entered in June from Panama? How does that compare to May? How does that compare to May 2020? And so by using this combination of the vessel list, which gives you the result from filtering, and tags, you can build up this kind of complex analysis of going, who's new here, who's on repeat visits. So I'm just going to jump from there to talk a little bit about some of the new things that are coming soon in filtering. So this is going to be a couple of in development branches that are going to be using this filtering framework in the same way, but they're new types of filters. So the first thing that's going to be coming out is speed. So in this instance here, I'm looking at the last couple of days. I'm looking at vessels that have entered the Australian EEZ from a foreign port. I can see that I'm looking at fishing only vessels. And now when I go, or very soon for you, now for me, when I go into vessel activity, I can see speed in area as one of the options. And so I can choose whether I want it to be under or over a certain speed. I might be looking at speeding near the coast, or I might be looking at slow movements through transit areas, or potentially fishing. And so I can go, show me the vessels that have been traveling under 3 knots, and there's probably none. Or maybe there should be none. So in this case here, I can see that there's one longliner that has entered the Australian EEZ from a foreign port. That is, the last port of call was outside the area, and it's traveling under 3 knots in the area. And it looks like this vessel up here, which that's not what I was expecting to happen. So what I can see here is that this vessel is typically transiting at 10 knots, and then it slows down to 1.8 knots, 1.6, does a little jink, and then it's speeding up. And so that's kind of an ideal example of flagging a slow movement from a vessel coming in. And so this will be the next filter that we release in this filtering framework. Another one coming soon, specifically in the fisheries space, is looking at likely transshipments. So you can see here across the top, there's another new type of vessel activity. And so all of this filtering all of this activity filtering will continue to expand this vessel activity filter here. In this case here, a likely transshipment looks at encounters between fishing vessels and cargo vessels and fish carrier vessels. And there's a bunch of thresholds on what we determine to be a transshipment event. They need to be together for at least 4 hours. There can be gaps between the encounter events because sometimes vessels move apart over nighttime or if there is heavy weather. And the total duration can be a very long period of time. And so if we use the vessel list again to kind of look at the vessels that I'm looking at on screen, I can come down and see that there's this fish carrier here. If I click on this fish carrier and I go into its track history, I can see these 9 likely transshipments with 9 vessels. And so these are over and above a straightforward encounter. And I can see that the first couple sort of 13 hours and 14 hours. And like everything else in Starboard, if I click on it, I can come in and look at this event in detail. And so it's similar to an encounter, except that there is a dark red line for the likely transshipment and a dark icon. And the last thing I want to share in terms of upcoming work and new filters is similar to a likely transshipment. We're looking at inferred transshipments. And so in this case here, moving from the Pacific, and if I zoom in, you can see that there was this, again, dark red line, but an icon with a dotted line next to it. And an inferred transshipment is a situation where we only see one vessel moving on AIS. And in the case of inferred transshipments, there's a bunch more rules that need to be met. So it's the same time threshold, but also there's oceanographic conditions. The weather must be fairly calm. The location of the vessel compared to the wind direction, whether it looks like the larger fish carrier or larger cargo vessel is protecting the fishing vessel from the wind. And so there's a bunch of rules and conditions that need to be met over and above what we typically see as a loitering event for us to flag it as an inferred transshipment. And like everything else in Starboard, you'll be able to filter and slice and dice the data with that. And when we've been doing some testing of this inferred transshipment algorithm, we've been seeing that it has been picking up a lot of, when we remove the likely transshipments from the data, we see that it's picking up a bunch of those likely transshipment events. So we're feeling pretty good about the inferred transshipment algorithm. Cool. I'm just going to pause there just in case there was any Q&A that I missed or chat on there, Kelly.
No, I haven't seen anything come through in the chat or the Q&A yet. So I will jump in and start sharing my screen. Oh, no, you're going to carry on for a bit longer? One more?
No, I think conscious of time, I'll hand over to you and you can share your screen. Cool.
Thank you. So I'm going to change, well, a bit of a focus, I guess, still on fisheries and just talking a bit more about something that's been in the app for a bit longer. So I think a few of you may have seen this already and be using it already, but looking at the regional fisheries management organization integration. So the first one of these was shipped, I think it was around February with the FFA list of good standing. And the most recent one was the EU fleet register that's just been integrated. So there's a total of 15 integrated now. And these are coming from the publicly available on the internet list of authorised vessels, and it includes both support vessels as well as the fishing vessels. So it's relevant, I guess, for carriers, bunkers, the fishing vessels, etc. To do the matching, the team have done a lot of work. Obviously, AIS data is very messy and a lot of the identifiers can be missing at times. So the team have done a lot of work, especially Dave and the team, to bring together multiple identifiers. So looking at vessel name, the flag, the MIMSI, the IMO, and the call sign, and looking at the strength of the matching between all of those. And on the Help Centre, there's a couple of good articles with a lot of detail about how that matching works. So if you wanted to have a look into some of that information, you can. I guess one of the things to note is that not all the vessels will be matched. So sometimes there's not enough information, particularly on the AIS side, to be able to make that match. And in some cases where we've got duplicate vessels in Starboard, for example, there might be duplicate matches as well. So I'm just going to jump into Starboard now to show you a bit more about how that looks. And it's quite relevant to the changes that Andy was referencing from a filtering perspective. So what I've got here is just a new filter, or a filter applied with the new area of anywhere set up. And I've got fishing registrations in the WCPFC. So over on the left-hand side, this will be showing anywhere in the world over this time period where are the WCPFC registered vessels. And I can scroll around. Obviously, most of them are going to be in the Pacific. And if I just select one of these, down here you can see the different registers that the vessel is on. So if I go into that, this information here is available for each of those. So we've included information on the authorisation, there's vessel details included, including the vessel type, notable marking, vessel size information, also the gear on board, so looking at the potential freezers, the drifting longliners. So all the information that's available on that register is brought through, including ownership information and any history and charters. And that will look mostly consistent where possible. Some registers have more information than others, but we've tried to make it in a consistent format throughout those. And then there are some, for example, where there's not as many details available. And then there's some here, for example, where there's even more information. So the authorization information for ICAT's obviously quite specific for each of the different species and authorizations. So each vessel record will have a bit of detail available like that. And just jumping back to the analysis results. So one of the things here, so you can see there's the 1900 matched. I think when I last looked at it, there was about 2,700 vessels on the WCPFC register. So there's quite a few matches there. But one of the really great things which applies a lot in the filtering is the ability to bring through vessel subtypes. So now instead of just having fishing, which we have in the AIS information, we're able to see that it's actually a longliner, and similarly for cargo, you can see it's fish carrier. So using this information alongside the new filtering capabilities is really powerful. You could, for example, look at all the longliners across the world if you were to remove the WCPFC filter from that. So I'm just going to jump back into my slides. So I just want to talk a little bit and give an example, I guess, of how some of this information could be useful from assessing a vessel's arriving in port. So obviously there's various port state measures that exist, such as the Port State Measures Agreement and the FFA Regional Port State Measures Framework and the WCPFC minimum standards. All of those are in place to prevent fish that are caught through illegal, unreported or unregulated fishing from entering the supply chain. So just over here, there's quite a good simplified graphic from Pew explaining some of the Port State Measures Agreement, and particularly how a foreign vessel arriving into port needing to notify the port of its arrival and provide various information. So the hope is that with the additional RFMO authorisation information in Starboard, some of that information provided by vessels arriving into port can be validated against what you're seeing in Starboard, including the vessel's manoeuvring, the identity information, and obviously those authorisations from the RFMO. So I'll just jump back into Starboard and show a bit of an example of what that could look like. So here again, using the new filtering capability, I've just filtered to anywhere in the world, looking at fish carriers that have had encounters. So you can start to see some of the areas where there's quite a few encounters going on for fish carriers. And I've just selected this one already. So with this vessel, if I go into its information here, so you can see where this particular vessel is got registrations, which is quite a few. And if I go into the track history, you can also start to look at obviously all the encounters that this vessel has had. So if I just pick one of these, for example, this one here, and I'm just going to zoom in using the shortcut keys, the control key. So I can start to see that this vessel has been fishing in this area before it's met the carrier. I'm just going to select that vessel, so that'll make the carrier's line a bit lighter, and you can see the fishing maneuver a bit more simply. And you can obviously see here, this is in a WCPFC pocket where it's been fishing, and you can check the registration for that vessel quite easily. You can click out to the WCPFC website if you want to verify what's there. And then if you go back to the actual event with the two vessels, so I'm just going to zoom in a bit closer. So if I just click on the track to show when those two vessels come together and use the shortcut keys, I can move the vessel through time, so you can see quite clearly that both the vessels have been reporting on AIS for what appears to be all of this encounter. The length of the encounter, I think it was about 6 hours, so it's not very long, but I think in the new algorithms that Andy mentioned, this potentially would be flagged as a transshipment. And then you can see the two vessels have separated. So it's quite a clear, easy to view one there. If I just go back to the encounter event, I'm just going to click on the track, sorry. So you can see here a couple of different ways to look at the coordinates. So if you were to be, I guess, verifying this against some self-reported information of when the encounter or the transshipment occurred, there's a few options of looking at the coordinates here and here. And as you move through time, those will change. There's also the option to turn on AIS data. And when you do that, if you click on any of these points, it will show you the location information, and you can copy that. And it will also show you the source of that. And then the other option, particularly if you've got a location that's been provided to you that you want to check, you could use the circle measurement and enter these And I know that there's an upcoming change where we're going to look at updating these to degrees, seconds, and minutes as an alternative to the current lat longs that we use. So those are a few different ways that you could check, I guess, the exact positions of when and during that encounter. And the other thing that could be useful, depending on the information you've been provided, is just to make it easier to not try and have to convert time zones. You could change your time zone here as you need to. So the other thing I just really quickly wanted to show you, I'm just conscious of time, but I think we're okay. Just going back to what Andy was talking about before with the vessel lists, so combining these filters. So I've just picked this recent time in Uruguay. Actually, most of these vessels were not heading into port. They were sheltering from the storm, but it was just a very busy area for the Uruguay port, or very, very busy time. So what I've done here is select all the vessels in Uruguay. I've looked for vessels that are not flagged to Uruguay. Looked for fishing vessels using the vessel subtype, which I was going to mention actually is we've got about 17,000 vessels have been updated with this subtype, with all the RFMOs that have been brought in. I've also just filtered to an activity here to look for vessels that have been at port or anchorage. So this has come up with a list of about 91 vessels over this time that may have been heading into port in Uruguay. And some of the options here, obviously, which can be quite useful from a port state measures perspective, is the ability to click on that to filter to look for any IUU listed or closely linked vessels, and also being able to go then into this vessel list where you can see the RFMO information here again, potentially filter for things like duration at sea since the last port visit, and then say tag vessels that you might want to add for an inspection, for example. So I just briefly wanted to touch on that. But that was all I was going to talk about from an RFMO perspective. I know it's quite fisheries focused and not everyone on the call works in that space. So I wanted to allow lots of time for questions. So I'll stop sharing my screen there and see if there's any questions or chat that we can look at.
Had a couple of questions there, both of which I've dropped an answer to. Maybe in the first instance, I can share my screen just to show that vessel in question. We were looking to look back a few months in the life of this vessel. I can see that it's operating off Africa here, and there are a bunch of anomalous movements and loitering events noted. And so what I was showing before, this is actually quite a good example, was a new development branch that was picking up the potential or inferred transshipment events, and it was looking at this here. And currently in the live platform, these are showing up in some cases as anomalous movements and loitering events. But it's likely that these areas here and these areas here are actually transshipment activity. And then the other question was about Starboard displaying which ships do not have AIS activated. And so in this case here, you can see that there's some dotted lines. So this is an example of where the vessel is not reporting its location on AIS. And then we're interpolating the position between these two locations. And if you, as Kelly showed before, you can go and turn on these AIS points. And if you turn off the tracks, you can see when the information is being received and when it's not. In this case here, you can see there's a bit of a rainbow. The green terrestrial receivers, the blue receivers which are on other vessels nearby, so they're moving receivers, and then the purple, the satellite based receivers, which you'll see on the high seas, and often as you get closer to coasts, if there are coastal AIS receivers, you'll see a bunch of these green dots. So that's the first way we kind of indicate it. And the other way is we use additional satellite data. And I think if I jump back, we have a little bit of example data that we can share with customers. In this case here, we're looking down in the Tasman Sea, and we're looking at a synthetic aperture radar image on the screen here, and I can see that there's a bunch of dots. Some of these dots are yellow, some of these dots are white. When there is a white dot, that's when we've detected a vessel that matches with AIS. And when there's a yellow dot, that's where we're picking up a potential vessel that is not corresponding with a vessel on AIS. And we do the same process with radio frequency data, and it looks the same way. When there's a corresponds, we tell you the location and the type of detection, and when it's not corresponding, you'll get a missing corresponding AIS message, a potential dark vessel.
Andy, another question came in, but I think you were pretty much answering it as it arrived around showing dark vessels. I dropped out there for a second, so I don't know what happened to my Zoom connection, so I'm sorry if I missed anything, but I was wondering, is it worth showing maybe an example of the buoy analysis along those lines? So not necessarily for detecting dark vessels, but where the vessel's not reporting on AIS. I don't know if you have an example handy, or I can look for one.
Yeah, if you could share your screen, that's a good example. If you have one.
Well, give me a second.
So yeah, in this instance, particularly in the fisheries space, what we see is that a vessel will deploy buoys as part of the fishing activity, and the buoys will have AIS transponders on board, so the parent vessel essentially can find them again, and other vessels can see them. But the parent vessel itself may not be reporting its location on AIS.
I'm just going to, I have tagged one previously, so let's see how I go at finding it on screen, but I might have to go into the tagged vessel list to actually find it, so especially with all these other filters on. There we go. I think it would potentially be somewhere over here. Can't quite spot it, but let me go into the tag vessel list. So over here, you can just look for the specific tag that you're after. So this example was the manoeuvres, and I've included, when I tagged it, I included a link to the URL for the analysis. So hopefully making it easy for me to go find again at a different time. Hopefully it will be there. Great. So this is just an example where this vessel over here was reporting on AIS for a period of time. And then as it's moved into this area, it's sort of been a bit intermittent in its reporting. I'm just going to scroll a little bit faster through time. And from around about early February, there was quite an extended period of time where the vessel wasn't reporting on AIS, and then it pops up again over here. And during this time, there's this set of buoys that I've selected down here were all still reporting on AIS. So this is just an example of where the buoy layer, which is generally defaulted to turn off, you can turn it on, and looking at previous relationship between the two buoys, between the vessel and the buoys, you can kind of infer that maybe they are related. And in this case, the naming of them as well. So the vessel is Mueller 0926, and all the buoys are named in a really similar way. So you could infer that these particular buoys belong to that vessel. This is often the case with longliners in particular, that they're using AIS devices on the fishing gear, and you could infer that this vessel is currently fishing within this EEZ. And if we look back over a long history, you can see that the buoys and the vessel often have a relationship all throughout the Indian Ocean there. So it's just another option, I guess, of using AIS. So while the vessel was dark on AIS, there's still some reporting potentially to check there.
I think that covers the last of the questions. I think I might just share my screen for one last time to talk about something which is a little bit different to what we've covered here. One of the things that is beneficial is we've talked a lot about analysis of fisheries. We've talked a lot about areas in the Pacific and off Africa. One of the things that we can do when we're only loading the vessels that match the query is it's a much better way of dealing with vessels in high traffic areas. And there are a few more traffic areas than around Singapore and around South China Sea in Asia. And so in this case here, I'm looking at a week of vessels that have entered the Singaporean EEZ, which previously would have been very difficult and required a lot of sort of cell unblocking to view in Starboard. And now this sort of analysis can be done really quickly, and I can see the traffic move through a really, really dense area through Singapore. And so, yep, it's good for the sparse analysis, but also good for analysis of traffic in really dense areas too.
Andy, there's just one more question that's come up there around keeping track of dark vessels. I don't know if there's anything in particular you wanted to note about that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really, really difficult question. The short answer of the best way to keep track of dark vessels is use of high resolution satellite data in areas, and also open source intelligence. There's a large field of work with some experts in the space that use the wisdom of crowds, use the identification of vessels within ports in combination with high resolution satellite data. The satellite data that we were looking at just before, because it was focused on fisheries and looking at large areas of the ocean, there's always a trade-off. The larger the area of the Earth that you cover, the coarser the resolution and the harder to identify a vessel. And that sort of satellite data that we shared, what you're doing is detecting the presence of a vessel, but not identifying it or tracking it. But with the use of high resolution imagery where the identification of a vessel can be made, that's the process of tracking it typically, which is a tricky challenge, but certainly something with the growth of satellite data is improving.
And there's one more question about creating an area in Starboard. So absolutely, we can do that. Andy, I think you'll probably know soon, or the date for when all the EEZs will be available. But yeah, if there is a custom area, we can set that up for you. And once that's set up, you could use the filtering in all the ways that Andy's shown to then be able to look at the vessel list and download vessel information once you've done that. So if you do have an area that's not a typical EEZ, Andy, when were the EEZs going to be available?
In the next, it's always tricky to say these things recorded live on camera. So let's say we're confident that it'll happen this quarter.
But yeah, in the meantime, if there is an EEZ that you want added, we can do that, or a custom area, we can do that as well. Just send us an email.
Cool. I think that is all we wanted to cover today and all the questions, and I think we've covered most of the Q&A, so thanks very much for jumping on. As always, drop us an email with any thoughts or feedback, and particularly around the filtering. As I mentioned, we showed speed, we talked about transshipments, inferred transshipments or single-sided transshipments, and also we have being able to work with passports is coming soon, so you'll be able to set alerts and filters on vessels that have previously visited Indonesia, for example, before entering New Zealand, and construct your own kind of past port visits and tag and analyze the data based on that. And so all of that is kind of building on the framework that we talked about today, which was released last night, New Zealand time. And so there's going to be lots of improvements coming on the top of that over the next few months.
Awesome. Thank
Cool.
you, everyone. And we will send out the recording of the webinar as well. So you'll be able to review it or share it, or anyone who wasn't able to attend can watch it.
Thank you.
Thank you.